And former National Security Council Chief of Staff Fred Fleitz, great to see you gentlemen again tonight.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
All right, I want to read something from the Wall Street Journal. Headline, Saudi Emirati leaders decline calls with Biden during Ukraine crisis. It goes on to say both Prince Mohammed and Sheikh Mohammed took phone calls from Russian President Vladimir Putin last week after declining to speak with Mr. Biden. Fred, what do you make of that?
Well, the sad reality is that Biden has had a very poor Middle East policy. He's alienated several Middle East states, especially Egypt and Saudi Arabia. I'm surprised about the UAE. Part of it is that there's been a focus on human rights, and we haven't focused on energy and security relationships with these countries. But these nations are also very upset at the disastrous nuclear deal with Iran, which Biden is trying to reinvigorate. We now know we're trying to reinvigorate by putting Russia in the driver's seat for this agreement. Now that we need the Saudis' help for increased oil production because of Biden's diplomacy or lack thereof, it looks like they are not that willing to help.
Well, as the president has said, there will be a ban on Russian energy imports into the U.S. The ongoing conversations then with Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Iran, other places aren't so appetizing to most Americans, and yet they're happening. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says this: Mr. Biden bemoans today's skyrocketing gas prices, yet he remains hostage to the green energy donors whose policies guarantee higher prices. The president is enabling Vladimir Putin's energy leverage, even as he claims the opposite. David, he talked a lot about green energy today, and yet the constant focus from the right is why not go back to the energy independence that we had more broadly, more production here in the U.S. under the previous administration?
You know, we talked last week on your show about the fact that the U.S. was still receiving imports of oil from Russia. And I said then I expected that Biden would ban oil imports from Russia. And he has now done that, which is a good thing. One of the things that the U.S. is doing with its sanctions strategy is it's ratcheting them up each day so that Russians feel like they're assaulted each day by something new, and they feel the stranglehold of U.S. sanctions in order to coerce Russia into backing off of Ukraine. But with respect to what else the U.S. can do, it needs to continue to ratchet up those sanctions, and it needs to try to support the Ukraine with more weapons. And we talked earlier about the MiG fighter jets that could come from Poland. And it's really important that Ukraine gets those MiG fighters. The reason they are MiGs and not, as Congresswoman May suggested, maybe U.S.-made fighter jets is because the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly Russian-made jets. So it's important that former Soviet Union bloc states provide those MiGs. So that's why they're going to come from Poland. They could also come from the Baltic states. Now, Poland wanted to ship them to Germany, which goes west rather than east, where they need to go in Ukraine. The Ukrainian pilots can pick them up in Poland, and that's what Ukraine would prefer. And I understand from contacts in the Ukrainian government, they've been trying to work this out with Poland. I do expect the U.S., Poland, and Ukraine to reach an agreement and get those jets to Ukraine. Ukrainian pilots are still flying, which is really important because they're contesting the sky with Russia. But as they lose jets, they need to be supplemented with more jets from other NATO states. So that's very important. And we heard earlier President Zelensky giving a paraphrase of Winston Churchill's "We shall fight on the beaches" speech, and they shall also fight in the skies.
Yeah, a lot of discussion about these jets, and the Pentagon coming out this afternoon saying sort of that they were caught off guard by this, and they didn't approve of it. That Poland was, a sovereign nation; they could do what they wanted. They didn't want the U.S. roped into this coming through an air base in Germany. Senator Sass, we read a little bit of his statement last hour. Here's more of it. He says, "Let's be very clear: Ukrainians are getting javelins and stingers from NATO territory. So why exactly does President Biden think that Ukrainian MiGs, flown by Ukrainian pilots, would be shot down over NATO territory while they're on their way to defend Ukrainian airspace?" So, Fred, do you agree with David? Do you think a deal gets worked out on that?
I want to first say that Biden is not ratcheting up sanctions as part of some great plan. He clearly put on the oil sanctions because Congress forced him to. Congress was about to pass legislation to do this, and Biden decided to change his policy. Concerning these MiGs, they present a number of problems. Apparently, the Poles are worried about Ukrainian pilots flying them directly to Ukraine because they thought that would be too provocative. So they dumped them on the United States to let us worry about it. I worry what will happen if these Ukrainian pilots fly these planes into Ukraine. The Russians are going to track them. They're going to track them with satellites. Where are they going to land? Where are they going to be fueled? And how soon will it be until the Russians find them and blow them up? I think the Pentagon has reasons to be leery about this plan, and I don't just think it's reluctance by the Biden administration. I think they're well advised to be very careful with this. I'm not sure it's a good idea.
All right, Fred and David, we got to leave it there for tonight. I assume our conversations will continue for the foreseeable future. Please come back soon.